Hello everyone, and welcome to KEScast. Today, myself, Ryan, and Finn will take you through our podcast on the state of modern cinema, where we'll be discussing the situation around big-budget blockbusters, originality and remakes, marketing, and the public opinion of cinema.
First up, large-scale Hollywood films. Why does Disney make so much money on remakes?
First off, looking at Marvel and Disney, round our table we've got
Joe, my name's Will.
Daniel.
I'm Ella.
I'm Finn.
Righty-ho. If I were to go to the cinema, like this weekend, for instance, what I would most likely see is some sort of torrent of Marvel movies. I mean, they're the synonymous with what I would say is probably wrong with cinema right now, but they did come from somewhere and they do make massive amounts of money. I mean, just a quick search would say that the latest Ant-Man movie, which did awfully critically, still grossed over $471 million in the US markets, which is greater than a lot of independent movies ever could dream of. So that kind of leads to the question is, what do we think of modern cinema? Do we actually think this is the way cinema should be, or is this just the way it is because of why? The audience, cinemas themselves, or is it down to Hollywood and what they get produced? So what do we think?
I think the cinemas, they want to choose a safe option to make money. So if they recycle old characters that they've already used and they know people like, then it's a more safe way of making money, and that's why they're leaning more towards that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm going to talk a lot about the Marvel Cinematic Universe because I used to really enjoy it. I mean, let me be honest, I still do keep up with it quite a bit, more than I should. And a lot of what gave it that initial success was a very good degree of consistency. But what that's allowed them to do is now they've gone from making consistently good movies to being, frankly, unoriginal. They can just keep reusing ideas they've done over and over and over, and people still watch them because they have attachment to the brand and the characters.
Yeah, I think as well with the whole Marvel thing, the reason why that was so successful is the audience members already had a knowledge of the characters because they were from comic books and they already knew that they existed. They already had that connection to them. And I think that's why Marvel initially became so popular, and that's similar to what Joe was saying about how they still have the connection now and why they're just regurgitating the same ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually pretty smart. If you're going off that line, you could also say that it's not even just the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because you've got, even in the early 2000s, you had Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi trilogy, and then what? It's 2006, 2008, there's the Batman. I don't know when the Batman movies came out.
Yeah, around 2008.
Well, there you go. You've got the Batman trilogy, which came out, and of course, these characters are really old. So there is probably this idea of connection to them. Yeah, the next thing I've got here is, does Hollywood care about profit? And I mean, it is probably profit, which is leading into the regurgitation of similar characters and ideas because it's what people think it's safe. But let me rephrase this. Is it Hollywood which is making these movies because it's what's cheap and easy? Or is it Hollywood is making the movies that the audience demands, and it's the audiences that keep watching these movies?
On some level, they keep watching the films because they don't have other choices. Media...
Do you think that's true?
I'm sorry, partially. Because people keep making films that make a lot of money, and people keep watching films that have made a lot of money because they're successful. So in some ways, it's kind of a cycle.
There's also a lot of movies still do come out. There's a lot of independent films. It's just people don't go to watch independent films, really.
Because they don't come from sources that people have heard of. They don't have the same credibility in media.
So, would you say people are, scared of new concepts in films or media in general?
Yeah, I guess they could as well. And also the idea of the internet and how that's become quite a leading influence in how people view movies. All these new movies that have come out of nowhere. People aren't if you look on Twitter or Instagram, people aren't going to be talking about these movies. So there's no real way for people to almost discover them in the first place because they're not getting shown at the cinema. The cinema has started to reach a decline in the actual going out and viewing the movie with the influence of streaming and on-demand stuff. So I guess it kind of relates back to that.
I can definitely see that. This is my thought, at least. With I think you're right that people are sort of scared of new, like trying to take, watch new content, see that something that's completely unfamiliar. I mean, everyone is a little bit afraid of the unknown, but I think you kind of unspokenly made a point about the idea that it's sort of more to do with where these films are coming from, and I would think marketing. I'm gonna break it down. I think it's marketing, because even like aside from like trailers, standard stuff, you've got Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok Shorts or whatever. But if I were to open TikTok right now, I bet you within like a minute of scrolling, I could find some sort of Marvel theory, influence, and story. And it's these people basically. It's using characters, but this is all working in favor of big brands, pretty much.
What about producers? Would you say large-scale producers like Hollywood or like Netflix are also scared of making new concepts?
Okay, I'm gonna go against you and say that I don't agree with Netflix, because Netflix has been going crazy. Netflix is really weird as a business, because they've been just greenlighting so many different shows, and then they kill them off as soon as they don't make enough money. But they still do give a lot of shows opportunities, which is something I don't think you see with modern Hollywood. I mean, right, let's do some searches. 2023 top grossers dot stock. Right, here we go. So, what do we think is number one? Guesses? Any guesses? We can bets in now.
This year, 2023.
2023.
Barbie.
I already saw it.
Okay.
Also Barbie.
Okay, let's skip Barbie because Barbie was too obvious. Number two.
Oppenheimer or the new Spider-Man one, Into the Multiverse.
Across the
Multiverse.
Across the
Spider-Verse. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know.
Get out.
The second. Ciao.
Adios. You're fine.
I loved the first one, but I haven't gotten a chance to see the second one. The one where it's Miles Morales.
Yeah, okay. It's not. It was the Super Mario Bros. Movie at $1.36 billion.
Jesus.
So,
Chris Pratt's brilliant.
Chris Pratt. He's also the star of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is the 4, so
Yeah.
he's going crazy. But, I mean, it still highlights a point, though, is the top grossing movie is Barbie. I do not think you can get a bigger brand behind a film until you bring in Super Mario Bros.
Yeah.
We'll ignore Oppenheimer because it goes against my argument. You also have, again, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the third of the trilogy. A good movie, sure, but it is still got, massive brand recognition behind it.
To be fair, Oppenheimer does kind of work, because you could say it's part of the Christopher Nolan brand. Like, I know it's quite a big deal, like, oh, I've seen every single Christopher Nolan movie, all that stuff, like, watching all his different, ideas and progressions. I think that's quite, a big brand that he's created as a director, he is.
Yeah, actually, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I watched it because it was a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, Barbenheimer.
Yeah.
You cannot deny that. There was, for those who are unaware, Barbenheimer was a trend because they released on, I think it was the same day, even.
Yeah.
So people want to watch them back to back. They're actually a really good combo for each other, I'll be honest. No, but it works, because if you start with Oppenheimer, you go from being depressed to being happy again, because Barbie's just kind of a happy, upbeat movie.
Debatable.
There are some hidden messages.
There are messages, but at the end of Barbie, right, they don't end with being... Let's compare the... Okay, this is hot.
No murder in Barbie.
Yeah, okay, that's true, but completely off topic. You compare the ends. What's the ending of Barbie? Everyone sort of gets back to the original state. Barbie Land is restored.
She sees a gynecologist.
She sees a gynecologist. They end on a punchline. What's the ending of Oppenheimer? Oppenheimer goes up to Einstein and says, I think I've killed everyone.
Yeah.
I think we're all dead. Different movies. But yeah, no. Christopher Nolan. I think you're absolutely right. I watched it because it's a Christopher Nolan film.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan is such an important director. If we think of modern cinema, that he can get away with this kind of thing. And I mean, even then, if you've got any knowledge at all of history, you know who Oppenheimer was. I mean,
Yeah.
he is the man who invented the nuclear bomb. He's quite an important historical figure. It would be a lot easier to sell a movie about Oppenheimer than some random historical figure.
Like Mark Oliphant. He's like an Australian physicist who sort of it was played a large part in being the first sort of group of people to split an atom. Like you don't really see anything about that. You see about what that produced, like a nuclear bomb from Oppenheimer.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, there was 1,000 people who worked on Oppenheimer, and they're not on the movie cover. But yeah, so same idea. And then we also have another sequel, Fast and Furious number 10. Number 10.
Churning them out.
Oh yeah. And then we've also got Spider-Man, Spider-Verse 2, but then we've got another sequel.
Oh, Wonka, that's technically a sequel, because it's
a remake.
Remake, yes, remake. Prequel, yeah.
Remake, right.
Yeah.
The point is, we've got just this absolute torrent of either important figures or big IPs which are dominating the modern market. And so again, I links back to the question, what are we thinking? So are we thinking it's the audience who wants to watch stuff with the big names, or is it the cinemas which are only greenlighting stuff with the big names and putting the money in?
The point you made about Netflix, about green lighting everything, it doesn't have anything on cinema. It's all on the streaming service. So the companies that are doing the streaming services are the ones that are gravitating a larger audience with all their sort of new concepts. So would you say that newer concepts are what people want to see?
I'm also going to slanderize you again, but are you going to tell me with a straight face that Disney Plus produces a drop of original content?
No, of course not.
The National Geographic documentaries.
Yeah, but like, National Geographic.
There's only a certain amount of animals you can look at.
Yeah, the lion's way many times.
I don't think it's the majority of streaming services, and even then, I also we're talking about Disney as in the owners of Disney Plus, as in the company which has almost a monopoly on the entirety of Hollywood and the entertainment industry, or at least
Wars and stuff.
They own so much franchises, and they make shows and they make everything. They are as close to a monopoly as we could possibly get.
Now, continuing with a new team and a microphone that's been thrown into the toilet. Give it up for
Ryan Aurelia.
I'm Finn Mendes.
I'm Peter Hell.
Ella.
Dan.
Freddie.
Great. These ones take lower wages, so we're all good. Back to where we were. Okay, it just says Disney live action. So let's talk about the Disney live action remakes.
That's a contentious topic.
Right. So we were thinking about the idea that modern cinema, right, you can either break it down to either the cinemas are cowards and they don't want to show original content. It's audiences who don't have a desire to watch original content, maybe not explicitly, but definitely implicitly. Like, there's always some degree of, comfort in what's old, and again, I'll harbour on, but I used to be, I still kind of am a big MCU fanboy, right? Why did I realistically watch Ant-Man 2? Because I like the first one, and the second one has a 2 on it. So, there's a degree of consistency with company shows, and that makes me think, irrationally, honestly, that the next one will be good, I swear. So,
yeah, and I would say, following on from that, you can sort of tell that sort of perspective is common. A lot of people have that perspective because audiences speak with their money, and Marvel makes so much money even now from all of their films. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep making them.
But I think a big function of that might just be down to marketing. Oftentimes smaller budget movies do not get marketed as much, and so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you look at these big Marvel movies that are happening, they're all you've got trailers going, December 2025, the Avengers will meet up and they will kill a bad guy, and it's you will see that constantly, and there's a certain amount of the more money they put into marketing, the more money they're going to make from the film. And smaller films, or films that are less have a lower budget, tend to have less money put into marketing. Is that a problem with the sequel, or is that just advertising as a whole? Going back to the box office of 2023, Barbie was first, and of course Barbie isn't a sequel, but had a massive advertising budget. So was the Super Mario Bros. Movie and Oppenheimer. So you've got, three big movies with massive advertising budgets. That obviously definitely helped, but what I'm trying to get at is, do I really think that Barbie had an advertising budget which was, let's scroll down a little bit, 10 times higher than the Marvels? I mean, that's a pretty good one. The Marvels made about 1/10, 200 million to 1.4 billion. That's not 1/10, but still. It made substantially less money, and I promise you, I think the Marvels probably had a higher marketing budget. So,
yeah, the difference is sort of the marketing for Barbie was that it became like a sort of online sensation, like overnight. The trailer dropped and everyone was really excited about it.
It kind of,
Yeah.
it kind of marketed itself as a film through the attention it generated on social media, and people were kind of doing free advertising for the film with the trends that it started and everything, like wearing pink to the Barbie movie and people showing their outfits.
Yeah, but I'd imagine that can be also seen as a natural extension of the marketing around the movie, and kind of a lot of marketing agencies these days are doing more and more of these kind of guerrilla tactics of not necessarily having marketing be a big billboard, but more paying a couple of influencers here and there to spread kind of a seed of virality into the movie that might not otherwise have been there. So there's certainly that drive for...
I think it's quite difficult for a company to predict modern internet trends, in all honesty. I mean, if we were to give an example, Morbius is a movie which has been, if you're unaware, Morbius is a movie which has been exploded on the internet, people constantly making fun of it, but that didn't actually translate to almost any profits. It still did awfully.
And in fact, actually, Morbius is a better example than that, because Morbius, Sony made a bet that after the virality of it, that this internet audience would come back to cinemas to see it, having had it been viral, and so they re-released it in cinemas again, and it flopped again. So yeah, I do see your point about how actually these companies can't really predict that.
Absolutely. What I will say, you started off talking about Disney movie remakes, live action ones, and we never said anything about them.
Marvel's Disney.
Yeah,
this is true.
That's not a remake, is it?
It is a remake of the comics, but like
That's
as far as you say that everyone read the comics,
I think,
Well, I still think there's a lot to say about the Disney remakes, because, I mean, let's face it, why on earth would Disney need to make the remakes?
Money.
If they were, unless it was hypothetically they're completely out of ideas and these films make money. But let's think, do we think they made money? What do you think is the most profitable one?
Lion King,
I think
probably,
Lion King.
Yeah.
The Lion King
remake
box office. It made a cool 1.6 billion international.
Jesus.
1.6 billion. That is crazy. And that's for a remake.
Yeah.
So that's why they're making it.
Yeah. I mean, the original. Yeah.
I think with this one there's a massive nostalgia factor because of how long the kind of time frame was between the live action and kind of the animated one.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I don't know, maybe the animated one was like, it was iconic. It was like, it was a family friendly kind of, everyone would want to see it.
Yeah, it's a sort of classic, I guess, of film, really.
Yeah. So I guess it kind of makes sense that the live action would kind of
take off.
Succeed.
I suppose, but I mean, then it links back to the idea: is it the audiences to blame? Because the idea I'm getting is that it is, because I don't think we should stand for a situation where, I mean, the Lion King live action remake made more money than, it made more than Oppenheimer, which is a pretty great movie. There's a lot of good movies. I mean, we could scroll down and we could find some really independent studios which have made great movies, and they get a fraction of that. So I don't think we should strive to have a society in which this unoriginality is acceptable, but it seems like that's what's profitable, and so that's what's going to continue to happen.
I think there's also something to be said about where the gap of these smaller budget or more original films is, because it's not necessarily that it's in the entire movie industry, it's largely just in these cinema kind of blockbustery films that you see this lack of imagination, and I think that's mainly down to kind of the social aspect of you go to the cinema not just because you want to see a film, and not just because you want to kind of sit there and watch a film, but that you want to be able to then talk about it with other people, and so you go and see this film that is kind of the film du jour, almost like a film that everyone else is seeing. You see it because people are seeing it, and so they've started putting things onto the big screen that are not necessarily very original, because then it's that you've got the social aspect, which isn't, and then everything else goes to streaming services directly.
Yeah, I mean, the part of the reason I think the big Marvel films, those like massive action films with loads of cool effects, do so well is they are a fun experience. I mean, you don't have to think about them a lot, and I know you've been saying like a lot of film, like enjoying good films, is like taking that experience with you and then talking to people about it and like discussing different interpretations that you've had. But also, some people just want to go to the cinema to have a fun time, and you can't really deny that seeing loads of massive explosions is fun, even though it might get old.
Well, it goes back to that Martin Scorsese quote of Marvel films aren't movies, they're roller coasters. Like they're kind of designed to just be pure, unintellectual to a point.
Yeah,
and there is a certain amount of snobbery that gets put behind that. Like, I would never watch a Marvel film, you know. But I think they are not very challenging, at least on the surface. And have certainly got less challenging. Like, I know Civil War was more challenging of a Marvel film almost, because it brought into question ethical nuances of superheroes, whereas now you've got like Endgame, where it's like either the good guys win and everyone lives, or Thanos wins and half of the population ceases to live. It's kind of such a binary that it doesn't require much thought behind it. It's not very challenging. Slander, but
it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah,
though,
it's not.
It's just it's different people want to get and do get different things from different films. Yeah, and it's really up to personal preference and what you're looking to see.
And I'm not necessarily saying that them not being challenging or not being, and air quotes here, intellectual is necessarily a bad thing. Like, they're fun and they're good movie experiences.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of just go to the cinema to kind of relax and to have a bit of fun. Just so it makes sense that kind of Marvel films that are a bit mindless perhaps, can kind of end up prevailing. I mean, when I watched Oppenheimer, it was quite the opposite. It was quite a thought-provoking and kind of difficult experience. So, and you can understand why many people don't want to watch that, because it's bringing about emotions that they just don't want to have, especially like as they associate going to the cinema with these kind of nice emotions and having fun.
Yeah, so you really sort of end up with this sort of balancing point of like thought and like almost arguably quality, not necessarily, balancing that with like entertainment factor. I mean, you see in reviews like the films that make you think are regarded more highly by critics typically. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're the films that do better at the box office, because they're not always what people want to see.
It's just down to personal preference. I mean, do you want to go to see a film for an impactful story? Do you want to go see a film for really cool CGI? Just your brain does not have much thought about it. And I guess that could also be attributed to how you're feeling at the time, because if you do feel like you want to watch an impactful story, and that you would go and watch a film that has an impactful story, and that can also be down to marketing as well, because marketing will influence how you perceive a different film. So if you perceive some film, well, there's a lot of marketing going around films with impactful stories, then you might be more likely to go see a film with more impactful stories.
I think you're absolutely right, because now looking with like this new lens almost, you can almost actually split the movies on the box office list by either like the intellectual I'm going to feel things versus the I'm going to watch spectacle. Barbie, I mean, it's both a comedy and has a deep message, but then we've got movies like the Super Mario Bros. Movie and then Fast and Furious 10.
Yeah.
Like, these aren't particularly movies of spectacle, action, adventure, but they're not movies of
thought.
Barbie, I think, straggled the line quite well because there was the whole dance scene and things like that, so there is kind of a spectacle to it and it is family friendly.
Well, this has all been rather pessimistic. What are we to do, and what movies are worth your time?
Hello everybody, I'm Emily and today I'm joined by
Freddie
and Yara,
and we're going to be talking about the originality of films.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I spent the past half term doing nothing other than my computer science project, my NEA, and that meant that I had approximately 4 minutes in the whole year that I was on half term to watch films. So, I don't know, do you have any advice on what films I should watch?
Well, personally, I really prefer films that were made before 2010. I think now with films, they're becoming less original as all you see in cinemas and all you see that's being released on Netflix are limited series that are based off old books anyway, reruns of things that have already been made, or movies that have just been adapted from a series that's been going on before I was even born. And when it comes to actually finding things that I thoroughly enjoy, I'm drawn to things that are authentic, I'm drawn to things that are original, and I'm drawn to things that I can personally identify with as a person, morally and in every other sense.
Right, okay, so I'm now thinking any film made since the year 2010 is rubbish and I have no reason to watch it because all of the original ideas are taken. What do you have to say about that, Emily?
Well, I think that obviously a lot of ideas are reused, and that's understandable because, there isn't an infinite amount of ideas that one can have to create a film. So there's always going to be some crossover with films that have come before. However, I think there is still room for originality in new films.
I think a great example of one of the most successful and original recent films created is Barbie. A thought-provoking feminist take on the depiction of the popular toy brand, gaining popularity by mixing family fun with deeper themes. Freddie, Yara and Emily discussed their opinions on the film in this section, comparing the depiction of the toy with the previous media and evaluating the film's commentary.
I watched the new Barbie movie, a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that was really brilliant in how it put a complete new spin from what I know on the original Barbie films, and the way they approached issues facing women, etc., etc. I thought it was really up to date and really clever.
As someone that hasn't watched the new Barbie film but has only heard a lot about it, I don't like it as much as I think other people who might have not watched the old Barbie films, the cartoons and the originals, might have done, simply because the old Barbie films to me are things that represent magic, things that represent youth and innocence and all of those, beautiful things that as a child you really, really enjoy, especially as just, a little girl that's thinking about princesses and fairies. But with the new Barbie film, of course it addresses issues that are very, very apparent and very, very relevant to all of us in society. But as a rerun of Barbie and as something that's sort of rebranding that previous conception I had of Barbie, I don't like it as much. I think it might have been better personally if it was just a movie separately, maybe with a character that wasn't Barbie but was similar to Barbie but wasn't based off the Barbie franchise, only because I think that it's very different to what people probably would have expected. People might have just expected, seeing Margot Robbie on the screen and then she's giving everything that Barbie in the Dreamhouse gave and Barbie in the original films gave. But I think it's just something that's really important, 100%, but not as I would have wanted it to be shown in film. I don't think we should have got such a strong commentary on feminism from something that wasn't really advocating for feminism, but more for fairy tales and imagination and beauty in the beginning. How do you feel about that from a male perspective?
As a male who has never seen the Barbie film, what I'm getting the impression of is that you're sort of saying about modern films, you don't like it when they take something that's sort of been developed, this franchise like Barbie that's been around for years and years, and then takes a new twist in it. I disagree with that. We've already talked about how there's so many ideas in older films that you can't really reuse. I think you can reuse them. You just have to do that. You have to take a separate approach, and then you keep it fresh and you keep everyone interested. It's sort of similar. A film I watched recently and really enjoyed was Ridley Scott's Napoleon. That's, again, it's about history. History's already happened. That's plagiarism, but it isn't, because it's dramatized and it's fun, it's interesting, it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I
feel like going back to Barbie, you mentioned how the focus has shifted from, magical stuff which little girls really like, princessy stuff and things like that, and how that's completely shifted in the new movie. I think that, yes, it wasn't what I was expecting when I watched it, because I was expecting it to appeal to, little girls more. However, I think that was definitely a deliberate choice by them making the movie to be like that. And also, they put stuff in there for young boys as well. So the whole, I'm just Ken scene and Ken as a character was really appealing to young boys, I think. I think they intended to do it like that. And they still kept some of that kind of magic and fairy tale-esque essence of the old Barbie film. So, the beach in the Barbie film with the fight where they're using like beach toys and things like that. Yeah. And there are like beach balls flying through the air and then taking somebody out, stuff like that. And then the whole pink Barbie world was still as you'd expect it to be, and the costumes. Yeah. So I think that they did keep some of the, stereotypical Barbie essence from the old films, but also they introduced more modern themes, like obviously the feminism side of it, but also they had, women in all different job roles, like, flying planes, being doctors, etc., and kind of showing young girls representation. I think that was the intention with that. And maybe it wasn't the right thing to do to lose the original Barbie that everybody knows and loves. However, I think they have done something good by putting out the new film with its themes and message.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, one of the biggest criticisms that people have with like Barbie as a concept, like not the newer film obviously, is that it sort of sets unrealistic standards for people. Like, young girls are growing up thinking, I've got to be Barbie, I've got to be this perfect woman, and the film shows that's just not true.
In this next section, the three move on to discuss the wider consequences of a film like Barbie's and the impact of its ideology on women in society.
There are certain scenes in the Barbie film which I don't think I've seen before on TV anywhere. So there are things like when Barbie first emerges from Barbie World, she's like roller skating along, and she says something about, why do men look at me like that? Why do they look at me in such a vicious way? And I think that for me, that was kind of, there was a point in my life where as I grew up, I noticed that men started to look at me in a different way. And I'd never seen that represented anywhere before. And that was actually quite touching, to actually see it on screen. And so I think that although perhaps it isn't, as attractive to watch, maybe it isn't as interesting, I think that it's very important that that's kind of out there.
The main appeal with the Barbie film when it comes to the feminism stuff is that loads of people can identify with that now. Yeah. Like, loads of women, not just, in Barbie world, but women in reality of all ages, of all different, cultures and things like that, have been, subjected to these sorts of expectations, these sorts of standards, and they have been made to feel as if they're objects or just, things that are just the pinnacle of people's desires. And now that that's sort of been shown, especially with a franchise like Barbie, I think it does show like younger kids that might have gone to watch it thinking, this is about Barbie and it's going to be so fun and magic. I think that might have given them a bit of like insight into something they might have noticed before but not had the confidence to speak about, or not had the confidence to actually acknowledge and label as a thing that's happening. They probably wouldn't have known how prominent feminism is in their lives until watching the Barbie film and realizing they might have shared those experiences, they might have shared the same feelings that Barbie had. And even though you don't wish for a year 7 little girl to go to this movie and then be like, yeah, men have been looking at me like that, she can still identify with the feelings of, you know, wanting to be independent, because Barbie wanted to be independent from Ken, from what I understand, from the things like I've heard about it. And I think just that sort of independence is something that comes with age, no matter what your sex or gender is. But as a woman, it might be something that's experienced differently.
I think as well, you know, you mentioned kind of being objectified and, you know, being the pinnacle of people's desires and stuff like that. I think that as well, it's quite interesting that a toy as stereotypical as Barbie, you know, thin, blonde, perfect, has been used to kind of combat being objectified. I think that that's really interesting to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, you've been saying a lot about, and this is, again, really good, it gives people something to relate to in some ways, but more than that, it's sort of like a vessel to bring about like awareness of those kinds of things. Because like growing up, I've never had that experience, and I probably won't, and maybe understanding how that feels, it's important to realise for a lot of people. And just to generalise beyond just talking about Barbie alone, people sometimes say that films sort of reflect the standards and the sensibilities of the sort of the time they're made in, but I think more than that, films can change those sensibilities. You can use them as a tool for that, and I think Barbie's a good example of that.
Yeah. I think that is what makes it a very important movie. Even though I haven't had the chance to watch it yet, I definitely will try to watch it at some point.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it has won so many awards. It has been spoken about for so long, you know, Barbenheimer, everyone knows that phrase now. But I do think it's something that is worth thinking about, and whether originality is needed, I think is still up for debate. I think it really is just up to you on what you value in a movie. However, even though the actual plot itself might not be original, maybe the messages and the way they're being conveyed is original.
So I think if we sort of try and bring this to a close, it is up to you what you prefer, what you look for in a film, whether you want that sort of rose-tinted glasses, nostalgic experience of watching all the films with all these like crazy film scores, the music that's nostalgic, the themes that are just magical and like not grounded in reality, or whether you prefer something that's a bit more socially progressive or like tries to sort of break boundaries. And I think both of those have their advantages and disadvantages to like what you might enjoy. So it's really up to you.
That's something we'll leave to the audience to think about.
Definitely.
So thank you so much for listening to our section in KEScast.
Finally, let's have a quick look at the sources of inspiration for these movies.
A rule here starts an interesting topic regarding books and films being made from these books.
A lot of movies are like remakes and trying to revitalize old classics and even new classics, in fact. And my point was that it's not degrading a single side and a single aspect of the industry, but it's overshadowing, almost taking over the other aspect of the creative industry.
Yeah, and I mean, you can say that it's killing more traditional forms of media if that's your drift. Kind of, it's stamping graves of other forms of media. But
exactly.
I'd imagine it caters to it. It's catering to an audience, and it's kind of very much driven not by movie producers, but by people's own consumption habits. Books still get made, and they still get made in their thousands, and people still read books, and they still read them in their thousands, but people are preferring stuff that is easier to watch in a harder to understand world of today.
Yeah.
I mean, if I would take my 2 cents in, if you're thinking like just pure mathematics here, how long does it take to read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings? Some movies, for example. 20 hours, 30 hours, maybe 40? How long does it take to watch the movies? Less than 5. It's just that it's more convenient for the vast majority of people because it's less of a time investment.
Yeah, there's a time poor clientele. People have less time. And it's a fast-moving world. People don't have time to read books. That is also another point.
But that doesn't necessarily... Well, I mean, there's a difference between saying that books as a whole, people don't have time to read books, but more my thought is that these are like, the idea is remakes, right? And so we're thinking about, should a book be remade into a movie? And the question is, a lot of the people don't have the time to read classics, but they would to watch a movie of it or something, just because of pacing, really. A movie is going to be a lot faster paced than a book could ever realistically be.
Yeah.
I think there's a benefit to that as well, though. Like movies tend to be, in terms of plot structure, certain types of movies, I'm not saying all movies, tend to be very simplistic in their plot structure. I think books like, so for instance, one I read recently, Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, it's able to focus very much not on the events of the world, but more of the world that it sits in, because it sits in this genre of political satire, and so it's kind of mocking this island and its kind of like society almost, in a way that a film really couldn't do, because a film can't take that lens and you can't change the viewer's own mind with a film in the way that you can do with a book by writing it in an opinionated way.
I mean, this is my thought to counter that, is kind of reversing just a tiny bit. Going back to the idea that movies can't have the same structure as books, or movies have simplistic structures. Is that just what we're saying the modern movie is, or cinema as a whole? Because frankly, I would disagree on both fronts, because you've got many, many movies with crazy plots and timelines and series of events, but off the top of my head, Oppenheimer was one of the best-selling movies of this year. And I mean, I think personally almost one of its damning faults is the fact it obsesses over this cyclical and asymmetric structure where the characters are constantly switching between the past, the present, and some future. Now, obviously, Christopher Nolan tries to employ methods to separate these and make these easy to watch for the average moviegoer, but even then, Oppenheimer is quite a lot for most people.
Yeah.
But it still sold well. So is it a question that cinema can't be like that? Or is it just that it's not profitable to be that? And the only way for it to be profitable if it's a big name like Christopher Nolan, who can experiment with such interesting structure.
To me, it seems as though cinema is one of the easiest forms of media to get noticed in, so long as you are given a chance by a studio and a good enough budget. Nolan is able to do such ambitious structures because of his funding and reliability. Then again, in order for him to get big in the first place, he needed to have made something big and complex and original, and that must involve the structure being interesting, at least. I think for Nolan, Inception was his breakthrough, and while it did have a big budget, it was by no means simple. In fact, it's probably one of the most complex films ever made, arguably. And there have been many low-budget films that have been complex enough to change people's minds and change what they're thinking, because many directors must have risen from somewhere. They must have made good enough movies to be recognised in the first place, and if they weren't, then they wouldn't be where they were.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration through the art of cinema, through how modern movies are changed and affected by greed, money, and how yet we still see creativity in this day and age. I'd like to give special thanks to Miss Barton for helping us run KEScast, and I hope you'll be tuning in next time.